I want somebody to rein in my son's excitement. He gets a little excited about things.
That's encouragement.
Yes, I tell you, it is for me.
Like gasoline on a fire right there.
Right. I am just tickled to be able to talk to you about this particular subject because it hits home so much. You talk about wisdom, you talk about trying to learn, trying to gain this wisdom that is so much like a cloud, trying to grab a cloud. Wisdom is so available, yet so often it's so difficult for us to grasp. I've been listening to a man that I've been talking about for a couple of weeks. His name is Andy Andrews. If you get a chance to listen to any of his stuff, it's not religious, but it is. Everything he teaches is based on Bible principles. And he uses a lot of Bible as examples, but one of the things that he talked about was how to seek wisdom. And I was touched by his story because he started off his life in real trouble. You know, his mom and dad were killed at an early age, and as a teenager he was kind of wandering around trying to find his way. Spent a lot of time sleeping under a pier, you know. Homeless, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. And he talks about that period of his life and how he learned from it. And he talked about seeking wisdom. And he said, you know, it's so hard to know what is the right thing to do and the right direction to go when you don't have any background to draw from. He said, so he started asking people. And he says he's a writer now and he has a lot of money. So he says, I have a board of directors to give me advice now. He said the key to wisdom is find people who know more than you do and listen to them. He says, so I have a board of directors. And he says, I listen to them. And he says, every once in a while, I change my board of directors to somebody else to listen to. And he says, the thing is that you might be on my board of directors and you don't know because I just pick somebody. I pick somebody because I see in them wisdom that I don't have. And I listen to them and I pay attention to what they do. Really, that's what Solomon is talking about in Proverbs chapter 1 when he says wisdom is everywhere. It's shouting from the rooftop. Listen, pay attention. Get yourself a board of directors. Now, I was talking to someone the other day about being in board meetings and being in meetings where everybody gets together to have these brain sessions, you know, where you try and figure out which direction to go. And he said, you know, if you wind up in one of those meetings and you're the sharpest knife in the drawer, you're the sharpest person in the room, you need to change rooms. You need to get another room with people who are smarter than you are, because you can't climb if you're pulling everybody up with you. You need to have people who are better than you are at some things in order to get advice. Because I'll tell you what, every time I've been in trouble, it's because of my thinking. It's because of my decisions. It's because of my choices that I make because of what's in here. My best decisions have got me into some of the worst places in my life. My best decisions. My best choices. So how am I ever going to get better by continuing to make best choices that make me go in a downward spiral? I have a new favorite saying that Bubba and I have used for a while. And I don't want to insult my son, but I have learned something from him that I want to share with you. I got a call from him about a year ago. And he wanted to come home. And the last time he was home, it didn't turn out too well. But I could tell from his voice he needed to come home. He said, "Dad, I woke up with my face in the mud," because he was sleeping outside, sleeping on the dirt, and evidently got off of the cardboard and woke up with his face in the mud. I said, "Son, of course you can come home if you listen." I said, "You got a choice right now. The choice you have is you can either raise your head out of the mud, pay attention, get some wisdom, or you can lay your face back down in the mud, suck mud, and go deeper." I didn't realize how profound that would be. That came out of nowhere, but the more I think about it, the more I think that is the situation that we face in life. We can either seek wisdom, learn from it, get our face out of the mud, and climb, or we can suck mud and go deeper. I want to tell you a few stories from the Bible this morning. One of the first ones is the story of Ahab. Ahab and Elijah. Now there's some characters in this story that I want you to pay attention to. I don't want to read the story. I just want to tell you, and I'll tell you where it is, and you can go back and you can look at it yourself, because you really need to read these stories and ponder the thoughts in them, because, oh, there's some deepness, deepness. There's some deep mud here. And when you read the story of Ahab and his wonderful wife Jezebel, you can understand the mud and sucking mud and going deeper. Because Ahab and Jezebel had rejected the God of heaven. And they had gone off after Baal and Asherah. Now, if you know anything about the pagan gods, Baal and Asherah were... Baal was the god of thunder and lightning. He was the Canaanite equivalent to the Norse god Thor. And then you have Asherah, who was the goddess of fertility, where we get our day Easter from, Easter. She was the goddess that had her whole front side filled with breasts. And that's because she was able to feed the entire world, according to their mythology. And Baal was responsible for all of the rain and all the growth of plants. And he brought the sunshine, but he also brought the rain. And that was their belief. They would carve this into live trees. They would carve Asherah into live trees. And they would carve this picture of this woman of fertility into these live trees. So when you read about every live tree where they worship these goddesses, that's what it's talking about. Well, Elijah is going to Ahab, and he's going to confront him. Because this has got to stop. This has got to stop. They have 400 prophets of Asherah and 450 prophets of Baal. And Elijah is one man. Just one man. Now here's what I want you to think about. You can get more wisdom from one man and the truth than you can from 850 people who don't have the truth. And that's what Elijah is trying to get this king of Israel, king of God's people, to see. You don't need 850 prophets that tell you lies. You need one prophet that tells you the truth. Seek that wisdom. How do you tell? How do you tell wisdom when you see it? How can you tell when somebody's telling the truth and the other person's bald-faced lying right to your face? Well, Elijah has an idea. Elijah's got an idea. He says, tell these prophets of Baal to meet me on Mount Carmel. We're going to have a noon shootout. And they show up. They show up. So Elijah sets the parameters here. He says, I want you and your God, since he's the God of lightning, I want you to tell your God to start a fire here and burn up this sacrifice. You pick your sacrifice. You pick the wood. You put it on there. Put gasoline on there if you want to. But you have your God start the fire. I don't want any matches. You call your God and have him do it. Okay. They fall for it. I don't know what they thought they were going to accomplish by this, because I think every last one of them knew they couldn't call lightning out of heaven. But they did it because they have a king here who has been listening to them. Somehow they've got to do something to keep his trust, if he really ever had any to begin with. But so here's the thing. They've got this altar there. They've got the lamb or whatever it is that they're going to offer. They've got all of that there, and they start calling on Baal and Asherah. Please, consume this sacrifice. And they start in the morning. And they keep going, and nothing, no answer. And Elijah's standing over there saying, where'd he go? He go on vacation or what? Why isn't he listening to you? Call a little bit louder. Hey, do something. He's not here. I mean, I can just see Elijah just tormenting them to death. One man against 850. But guess what? Elijah understands that he has the God of heaven behind him, and they don't. So he keeps the pressure up. Finally, they start dancing around. They start cutting themselves. They start doing everything in the world they can. I don't know who they're trying to impress. Maybe the king. I don't know. Maybe they're hoping that a storm will come up and lightning will do it, but it didn't. So right here's a thing that we ought to think about. Throughout the Bible, we have examples of God's people speaking and false prophets speaking. In the time of Moses, when they went to Egypt, when Moses went to Egypt and Moses performed miracles, the magicians were able to imitate that in some ways, but they were able to turn a stick into a snake. I don't know how they did that. Do you know how they did that? Do you know how David Copperfield makes the 747 disappear? I don't know that either. But I do know that David Copperfield tells me it's a trick. I don't know how those magicians did it. But I do know this, that when they turned those snakes into a stick into a snake, that Moses' snake ate them. That ought to be a message to somebody. That ought to tell somebody something about who really has the power here. Well, in this case, Elijah's just making fun of them like you can't believe. And they're dancing around, cutting themselves, and finally, they give up. Now it's Elijah's turn. So just so that everybody will know the difference between them, Elijah has them come pour water on this sacrifice, on all the wood. He fills up trenches around the sacrifice with water. And then he just prays. And lightning, fire comes out of heaven and cleans it up. burns up the sacrifice, licks up the water, evaporates everything. And then Elijah says, go get them, kill them. Every last one of those prophets were killed. And the king, is he seeking wisdom? What would you think if it was you? What would you think if you were witness to all of that and all of it was done to convince you of who's boss here? Is he seeking wisdom? Wow. No. Elijah, before this now, the reason that this is all coming about is because the first thing that Elijah did was 3 years and 6 months earlier. Let's back the calendar up a bit. 3 years and 6 months earlier, Elijah had said, it ain't going to rain for 3 years and 6 months. And it didn't. And this caused unbelievable hardship in Israel because the people had nothing. You might survive a year with a famine. You might even stretch into 2 years with it. But man, when you get to the third year, who's going to have anything left? They didn't have anything left. The people were beginning to rebel against Ahab and Jezebel. Now it's time. Now it's time to show somebody who is the boss. Who is it actually that can call rain out of heaven? Who is it that can stop the rain in the first place? So Elijah stops the rain, calling upon God, and says, it's not going to rain till I say it's going to rain. After this little event here, after the prophets are slain, Elijah sends his servant over to the mountainside. They're on Mount Carmel, by the way, which overlooks the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful sight. I understand. I've never been there. Somebody send me to there, would you, so I can see this for myself. But he was standing on that mountain looking out over the Mediterranean, and Elijah says, what do you see? Nothing. Well, look again. What do you see now? Oh, hey, I see a cloud about the size of a man's hand. And Elijah says, tell the king to get back to town because it's coming a downpour. And so the king headed off to town. Here's the thing, though. Elijah somehow outran him on foot. Back to town. Now, a little bit later here, we have this happening. Would you have learned from that, by the way? Would that have convinced you of who it was actually that controlled the rain? Would it be this Baal that can't even move himself around? He has to have a statue moved by other people from here to there and everywhere? Or would it be the God of heaven that Elijah called upon and fire came out of heaven and rain came out of heaven when Elijah said God was going to give it? Well, you can say to yourself, oh, I would have learned from that. Then why don't we? If I would have learned from that, why don't I? Because I've had as many opportunities as Ahab has had. It's just that he's a more elevated figure. More is written about him. Nothing's written about me. I'm just a person. He was the king of Israel. But let's go ahead 3 years. Let's go 3 years in advance now. 3 years passed without war between Aram and Israel. This is in chapter 22. Of 1 Kings. Here's what happens. Ahab's at war with Syria, which I don't know whether you know the history of this or not, but Syria is Aram. It's called Aram in this passage. And if you remember back to the days of Isaac, when Abraham sent his servant back to Padan Aram to find a wife for his son Isaac, that's when he went back and his servant went back and found Rebekah for Isaac. Later on, when Jacob needs a wife, he goes back to the same place, Padan Aram, which is where their kin was. That's where their relatives were. That's where the place Haran was, where Abraham first settled, and the city was probably named after his brother Haran that died there. So these people are kin to the Israelites. They're cousins, but now they're enemies. And so Ahab is warring against them. They're fighting over territory just like the Syrians, which is the same people, and the Israelis are fighting over property now. Same property, same people, everything's the same. Nothing's changed. So we have this war going on, and Ahab wants to know whether he should go and fight or not. Now he's asked all of his... I would have thought that all of those prophets of Baal and Asherah would have died in that first conflict back there with the lightning coming down out of heaven. Evidently not. It's kind of like dipping your dipper into a bucket of water. When you pull it out, you look, there's no hole. Why is there no hole? Why is there no hole in the water? When you put a dipper in there and you pull it out, it's because everything fills in the void. There's always somebody to take the place of these false prophets because they're so plentiful out there, just like water. Well, now Ahab is calling upon the new filled in the void prophets that jumped in there to take up the slack. And he says, should I go to Ramoth Gilead to battle or should I refrain? And of course, just like the ones before, they say, sure, O king, go ahead, go. God's on your side. Yeah. And there must have been something about the way they said it, because he calls his son-in-law, and his son-in-law happens to be the king of Judah. And we're talking about Jehoshaphat. I love that name. I like saying that name for some reason. Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat is married to their daughter, to Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. I'm not real sure about that one, but he's a good king. Actually, he's a good king. And he wants to do the right thing. So he says, when Ahab says, will you go to war with me against Ramoth Gilead? Then Jehoshaphat says, sure, Dad. My horses are your horses. My men are your men. Yeah, but let's ask God first. And so Ahab asks all these prophets. Well, Jehoshaphat, I'm sure this is not his first run-in with Dad. So he says, okay, but is there still a prophet of God here somewhere that we can ask? He says, yeah, there is. But I hate him because he never says anything good about me. Huh? Would that make you think? Would that make you think if the prophet, the only one that's left... Now, in order to understand that, you got to go back and think about what Elijah said. He says, I alone am left. What he didn't realize was that in Ahab and Jezebel's household, there was a good guy. He was really a good guy. His name was Obadiah. He was actually the cupbearer of the king, or chief steward. I don't know the best word when you talk about, well, like Pharaoh in Joseph's time, the cupbearer. That was actually the one guy that had Pharaoh's ear at all times because he was in control of everything Pharaoh owned. Well, so was Obadiah. Obadiah was a man of God, though. Secretly, of course, because he had lost his life if he had been too out in the open about that. But you know what he did? What Obadiah did when they started killing prophets, and Elijah thought, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. Obadiah was taking them. He would find one. And I don't know, he must have had an entire army working for him at this, because he couldn't have done this and run the king's household too. But what he was doing was he was finding these prophets and sending them into different places. It says he hid them in caves by 50s. 50 of them here, 50 of them there, 50 of them over there. And then he was feeding them out of the king's store. Oh, you talk about a hero. This guy was a good guy risking everything for God's cause. I love Obadiah. Don't confuse that with the book of Obadiah, because that's a different prophet. But now, when you see what happens here, you see that Elijah thinks they're all gone. I'm the only one left. He thinks that, but it's not true. He doesn't understand the foresight of God, the providing, the providio of God. He doesn't understand it. Not only does God see ahead, God does something about it. He has an entire force that he uses to correct situations that need to be corrected. Elijah is out in the open, but there behind the scenes is an untold number of servants of God getting this job done. Now, here's what happens. Jehoshaphat comes to Samaria. He's sitting with his royal robe on with Ahab, and they're waiting to hear these prophets come. And Jehoshaphat says, don't you have one more that is actually a prophet of the Lord? And he said, yeah. Okay, well, let's get him. So the prophets go to get this prophet named Micaiah. Now, Elijah's not in the picture anymore. But Micaiah comes, and on the way, the prophets of Baal are talking to Micaiah, saying, now listen, we've already told the king it's okay for him to go to war. Now you get there. When you get there, you tell him the same thing. And Micaiah says, I can only say what the Lord tells me to say. That's all there is to that. He's kind of like Forrest Gump. That's all I got to say about that. He wasn't going to tell them what they wanted to hear. He was going to tell them what God said. And then when he gets there, the king says, shall I go up to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or should I refrain? And I don't know how this, because Micaiah just said, I'm only going to tell you what God tells me to tell you. And then he says, sure, yeah, go ahead. I don't know what tone of voice he used, but something about what he said didn't sit right with Ahab. Ahab says, how many times do I have to tell you to tell me the truth in the name of the Lord? He said, okay, all right, you want to know the truth? Here's the truth. I saw on the mountain the people scattered like sheep which have no shepherd. He said, and the Lord said, go home. You got no shepherd. Well, the king took that he was being told he was going to die. And then he turns to his son-in-law, Jehoshaphat, and he says, didn't I tell you he'd never say anything good about me? Now stop and think about this for a minute. Ahab's had stopped raining for 3 years and 6 months because God told him it was going to, because he was disobedient. Then 850 of his prophets are killed because he didn't listen. Now he's having this prophet tell him, don't you go to war or you're going to die. And he is so insistent on getting his own way that he says, take that man and throw him in prison, and don't feed him anything but bread and water till I get back. And Micaiah answers him and says, oh, king, if you come back, if you come back at all, I'm not a prophet of God. So, he goes ahead and goes. The thing that really disturbs me about this is that Jehoshaphat went with him. I can't figure that one out. But Jehoshaphat went with him, and they went out to battle. But here's something. I'm not really sure about the intelligence of Jehoshaphat, because here's what Ahab says to him. I'm going to disguise myself, and you dress up like me. Would you fall for that one? And so they go into battle, and it says, a certain archer, just a guy out there, fires an arrow at random. I don't know who random was, but I know where it went. And it found a joint in Ahab's armor. This may be the first smart bomb ever in the world, because that arrow was fired at random, and just like God said, you're not coming back. It found a joint in his arm and it killed him dead, right? He died in that chariot, just like God said. The sheep had no shepherd. Do we have to die to learn to seek wisdom from the Lord? Do we have to actually sacrifice our lives because of our own stupidity? Or can we listen and learn? Can we learn and turn? Because that's what all of this is about. It's about our willingness to listen to wisdom, to seek wisdom, to understand, legitimately understand what God is trying to tell us, because it's not that difficult if we want to know the truth. Now, you know what we read in 2 Peter chapter 1? The key, I think, to all of this is what Peter said, that to our faith, we have this initial belief that Jesus is who he said he was, that he is indeed the Son of God. When we believe that, right then, at that point, there's something that we need to add to that. And he says, to your faith supply this moral excellence. That simply is the desire to do the right thing. Do the right thing. Do you want to do the right thing? Ahab obviously didn't want to do the right thing. That wasn't what was in his desire book, you know. He had things he wanted to do, and the right thing was not one of them. But if we have this initial belief, trust that Jesus did live, he was what he said he was, and he can do what he said he'd do, to that add this desire to do the right thing. But then there's something else you got to do. You got to find out what is the right thing. Learn what is the right thing. Seek that wisdom that comes from God. Raise our faces out of the mud. Look up, learn, and move on with life. Or lay our face back down, suck mud, and go deeper. Ahab, he sucked a lot of mud. So did his wife. They're gone. They're gone, and what an example they left for us. Not one I want to follow, but I'm afraid all too often I do follow it, because I don't pay attention to the wisdom that is so obvious, so out there, so ready for me to change my life. But it can only happen when I want it, when I want to do the right thing, and when I do the right thing. If your life's not right this morning, if you know that you need to seek God's wisdom and turn in order to be saved, won't you take advantage of that wonderful blood of Jesus that we talked about this morning? How much suffering he went through for my sake. It'd be a shame for me to let that go to waste. If you're subject, won't you come while we stand and sing?